unfolds in a turbulent period when the Hebrew people were facing the consequences of their misguided choices. The scene was desolate. Once fertile fields lay abandoned, once prosperous villages withered under the yoke of an unyielding empire. The Midianites, known for their cruelty, had subjugated the nation for 7 long years, turning the lives of the Israelites into an endless nightmare. Gideon's daily life was marked by the constant threat of invasions. He and his compatriots lived in a state of perpetual alert, always watching for raiders who arrived like locusts, devouring everything in their path. The harvests, the fruit of months of hard work, were mercilessly plundered, leaving entire families on the brink of starvation. Fear was a constant companion, infiltrating every aspect of daily life. Meanwhile, in the mountains and caves, many sought refuge. These natural hideouts became the makeshift homes of countless Israelites fleeing Midianite oppression. There, among rocks and shadows, they tried to preserve a remnant of their culture and faith, away from the vigilant eyes of their oppressors. It was a precarious existence, but for many, the only alternative to slavery or death. In Gideon's youth, the stories of Israel's glorious past seemed like distant fairy tales. Accounts of the liberation from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the conquest of the Promised Land sounded like echoes of a long-lost era. The harsh reality of the present overshadowed these memories, leaving only a bitter taste of nostalgia and despair. The Midianite Empire was not known for its clemency. Their soldiers, mounted on swift camels, appeared on the horizon like a sandstorm, bringing destruction wherever they went. They were not content merely to loot. Their cruelty went further, humiliating and subjugating the Israelites in every possible way. The pride of a once strong people was crushed under the boots of these relentless invaders. Nights in Israel were punctuated by muffled laments and desperate prayers. Many wondered why God had abandoned his chosen people. Others, steeped in guilt, acknowledged that the current situation was a direct result of their straying from divine paths. Idolatry, which had long seduced the people, now showed its darkest face in the devastating consequences that plagued the nation. Amid this desolate scenario, Gideon stood out. Despite his youth, he carried a spark of hope and courage that set him apart. While many succumbed to despair, Gideon kept the flame of faith alive, even though it sometimes flickered in the face of adverse winds. His determination not to bow completely to the Midianite yoke was remarkable, though discreet. The young man keenly observed the suffering around him, absorbing every detail of the oppression his people faced. This sharp awareness prepared him, unknowingly, for the crucial role he would come to play. Each injustice witnessed, each cry of pain heard, forged in him a resilient character and a deep understanding of the need for change. The traditions and teachings of the ancestors, though weakened, were not entirely forgotten. In whispered conversations around hidden campfires, the elders passed on to young people like Gideon the stories of a time when Israel was free and prosperous. These narratives, laden with meaning and promise, planted seeds of hope in the hearts of the younger generation. Daily life under Midianite rule was a constant struggle for survival. Each grain of wheat hidden, each sheep protected from raiders, was a small victory. Gideon, like many others, learned to be astute and cautious, developing skills that would later prove crucial. Adversity paradoxically forged a resilient and ingenious generation. As the years of oppression dragged on, a growing sense that something needed to change began to spread among the Israelites. Whispers of resistance, though timid, started to circulate. Gideon, with his youth and vigor, was naturally drawn to these ideas, although he did not yet know the central role he would play in this imminent change. The sins that had led Israel to this situation were often discussed in moments of collective reflection. Idolatry, social injustice, the abandonment of divine precepts, all these factors were recognized as causes of the current misery. This painful but necessary self-criticism prepared the ground for an eventual spiritual and moral renewal of the people. The trials faced by Gideon and his compatriots were not only physical, but also spiritual and emotional. The constant pressure of living under an oppressive regime tested not only physical strength, but also strength of character and faith. It was in this crucible of adversity that the future leader was being shaped, though he could not yet imagine the extraordinary destiny that awaited him. On an apparently ordinary afternoon, Gideon was performing a routine but risky task. Hidden in a wine press, normally used for pressing grapes, he was threshing wheat. This activity, which should have taken place in the open field, was done in secret to avoid unwanted attention from the Midianites. The young man worked diligently, his movements precise and silent, a reflection of years living under constant threat. Suddenly, an unusual presence interrupted his concentration. A luminous being, clearly not of this world, materialized before him. It was an angel of the Lord, its appearance as unexpected as it was extraordinary. With a voice that seemed to echo through time and space, the celestial messenger addressed Gideon, calling him a mighty hero. These words, pronounced with divine authority, caught the young man by surprise. Gideon, perplexed by the title bestowed upon him, could not contain his disbelief. He who saw himself as the least member of the least family of his tribe being called a hero? The irony of the situation did not escape him. Hiding, fearful of the oppressors, hardly seemed like a valiant attitude. However, the angel was not deterred by Gideon's hesitation. With firmness and compassion, the divine messenger revealed to Gideon his calling. He had been chosen to deliver Israel from the Midianite yoke. The mission seemed impossible, a burden too heavy for the shoulders of a young man raised under oppression. Gideon, in his honesty, expressed his doubts and insecurities. How could he, an ordinary man, face an empire? The dialogue between Gideon and the angel unfolded like a dance between human doubt and divine certainty. Each of Gideon's questions was answered with an affirmation of divine power and purpose. The angel assured the young man that he would not be alone in this endeavor. The very God of Israel would be with him, guaranteeing his victory against all odds. As the conversation continued, a subtle transformation began to occur in Gideon. His words, initially marked by hesitation and fear, gradually took on tones of curiosity and even a timid courage. The divine calling, though still frightening, began to awaken in him a sense of purpose long dormant. In his humility, Gideon asked for a sign to confirm the truth of this extraordinary calling. This request was not a demonstration of disbelief, but rather a reflection of his prudence and the weight of the responsibility being entrusted to him. The angel, far from being offended, graciously accommodated Gideon's request, setting the stage for a divine demonstration that would strengthen the young man's faith. Gideon's initial resistance was not just personal, but reflected the state of mind of an entire nation. Years of oppression had left deep scars on the people of Israel, making it difficult to believe that deliverance was possible. Gideon's calling, therefore, was not just to lead a revolt, but to reignite hope in a disheartened people. As he absorbed the magnitude of his mission, Gideon began to realize that his life up to that point, the hardships, the fears, the small daily victories, had been preparation for this moment. Each challenge faced under Midianite rule had forged in him qualities that would now be essential: resilience, astuteness, and a deep empathy for the suffering of his people. The winepress, which moments before was merely a secret workplace, was transformed into an improvised sanctuary. There, among grains of wheat and the dust of the day, Gideon was having an encounter that would change not only his life, but the fate of an entire nation. The contrast between the simplicity of the setting and the grandeur of the moment was not lost on the young man. As the reality of his calling settled in, Gideon began to ask practical questions. How should he proceed? Where to start? The angel, patient and wise, provided initial instructions, but made it clear that this journey would require Gideon to have active faith and a willingness to follow divine guidance step by step. The angel's final words before departing were a powerful reminder: "Go in this your strength." This enigmatic statement suggested that Gideon's true strength did not lie in his physical or strategic abilities, but in his trust in the God who had called him. It was an invitation to see beyond his limitations and recognize the divine power operating through him. When the angel finally departed, Gideon found himself alone again in the winepress, but profoundly transformed. The half-threshed wheat around him seemed a silent witness to the extraordinary encounter. With his heart racing and his mind filled with thoughts, he knew that his life would never be the same. A new chapter was about to begin, not just for him, but for all of Israel. After the transformative encounter with the angel, Gideon found himself at a crossroads between faith and doubt. The weight of the mission entrusted to him was immense, and he felt the need for additional confirmation. not out of disbelief, but from a sincere desire to be sure he was on the right path. It was with this spirit that he decided to ask God for a sign, something tangible that could strengthen his conviction. In his burgeoning wisdom, Gideon chose a test that seemed impossible to manipulate: a fleece of wool exposed to the night dew. With reverence and expectation, he proposed to God that if the fleece were wet in the morning, while the ground around it remained dry, he would know his mission was true. It was a bold request, but made with a sincere heart. Night fell over Israel, and Gideon waited anxiously. The hours dragged on, each minute seeming like an eternity. He imagined what it would be like to wake up and find the sign he so desperately wanted. Could it be possible that God would really respond so clearly and unequivocally? The wait was a test of patience and faith. At dawn, Gideon ran to the place where he had left the fleece. His heart was pounding as he approached. And there it was. The fleece soaked, heavy with the night's dew, while the ground around it remained completely dry. It was exactly as he had asked. Emotion overwhelmed Gideon. It was a clear sign, a divine confirmation of his calling. But Gideon, in his caution, felt he needed absolute certainty. In an act of reverent audacity, he asked God for a second sign, this time reversing the conditions. The fleece should remain dry while the ground around it became wet. It was an even more improbable request, testing the limits of divine intervention. Again, the night passed in vigilance and expectation. Gideon could barely sleep, his mind filled with thoughts of what awaited him. He reflected on the journey ahead, on the difficulties he would certainly face. The second sign was not just a confirmation, but also a source of courage for the challenges to come. With the first rays of the sun, Gideon went to the place of the fleece. What he saw left him speechless. The ground was soaked as if it had rained during the night, but the fleece remained completely dry. It was an undeniable miracle, a clear manifestation of God's power and presence. These two miraculous signs had a profound impact on Gideon. They were not just magic tricks or happy coincidences. They were tangible demonstrations of divine power, specifically directed at him. The reality of his calling, once an abstract concept, now became concrete and undeniable. The fleece, a simple object from pastoral life, had become a powerful symbol of communication between God and his chosen one. Gideon understood that sometimes the divine manifests through the most common elements, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. The experience with the fleece taught Gideon a valuable lesson about faith and confirmation. He learned that seeking divine guidance was not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. God had responded to his requests with patience and grace, showing that he was willing to communicate in ways Gideon could understand and accept. These miracles served not only moments of doubt or fear that would certainly arise. He could remember these signs as tangible proof of divine support. The news of the fleece miracles soon spread among the Israelites close to Gideon. For an oppressed and discouraged people, these signs were like a ray of hope in the midst of darkness. The idea that God still communicated with his people, that he still cared about their suffering, began to rekindle the dormant faith of many. For Gideon, the fleece miracles marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. He was no longer just Joash's son, hiding from the Midianites. Now, he was a man with a divine mission, chosen to lead his people to freedom. The inner transformation that began with the angel's call was solidified by these miraculous signs. The fleece episode also served as a reminder of the importance of perseverance and faith. Gideon was not satisfied with just one sign, but sought additional confirmation. This attitude demonstrated not only his caution, but also his determination to have a solid foundation for the mission ahead. Reflecting on the miraculous events, Gideon realized that his journey was only beginning. The divine signs were the prelude to an epic saga that would change the course of Israel's history. With a heart full of courage and renewed determination, he prepared for the challenges ahead, knowing that every step of his journey would be guided by the hand of the God who had responded so extraordinarily to his requests. With divine confirmation strengthening his spirit, Gideon set out on the challenging task of forming an army. The scenario was not favorable. Years of oppression had undermined the morale of the Israelites, and many hesitated to rise against the powerful Midianites. However, the news of the divine signs began to spread, attracting warriors willing to fight for freedom. Initially, a considerable group of men responded to Gideon's call. There were thousands, ready to take up arms and face the enemy. The newly anointed leader felt a mixture of pride and apprehension seeing so many compatriots gathered, willing to risk their lives for the cause. It seemed that Israel would finally have enough strength to confront its oppressors. However, divine plans were different. In a surprising turn, God instructed Gideon to reduce the number of warriors. The logic behind this order was clear. The victory should be attributed unequivocally to God, not to Israel's military power. This directive placed Gideon in a dilemma: how to win a battle with fewer men. The selection process that followed was unusual and revealing. Gideon was instructed to observe how the men drank water from a stream. Those who knelt to drink were dismissed, while those who brought the water to their mouths with their hands staying alert were chosen. This peculiar method drastically reduced the army to only 300 men. The reduction of the army to such a small number was a test of faith not only for Gideon, but for everyone involved. The 300 chosen men must have felt the weight of responsibility, knowing they would be vastly outnumbered by the enemy. Each man present was aware that his participation was crucial and that the battle ahead would be extraordinary. Gideon, now at the head of this small but determined group, faced the challenge of preparing his men not just physically, but also psychologically. He shared with them the experiences of the divine signs, reinforcing the idea that they were engaged in a sacred mission. The confidence in God's promise became the foundation upon which this unlikely army was built. Conventional military strategy would suggest that such a small army had no chance against the Midianite hordes. However, Gideon and his men knew they were not alone in this battle. The divine promise of victory hovered over them, inspiring a courage that defied human logic. The preparations for the battle were unique. Instead of training traditional combat tactics, Gideon focused on strengthening the faith and unity of his small group. Each man was encouraged to see beyond his personal limitations and trust in the divine plan. This unconventional approach created a strong bond among the warriors, united by a cause greater than themselves. As they approached the confrontation, Gideon faced his own fears and doubts. Leading 300 men against a vastly superior army was an overwhelming responsibility. However, he found strength in the memory of the divine signs and the trust placed in him by his followers. The formation of this small army did not go unnoticed by the Midianite spies. Reports of a diminutive group of Israelites preparing for battle must have provoked laughter and mockery in the enemy camp. Little did they know that this apparent imbalance of forces was an integral part of the divine plan. On the eve of the battle, Gideon gathered his men for a final moment of preparation. He reiterated the divine promise of victory and emphasized that each of them had been chosen specifically for this moment. The Israeli leader knew that the true strength of his army did not lie in numbers, but in unwavering faith in God. The contrast between Gideon's small group and the vast Midianite army was striking. On one side, 300 men armed with fervent faith and the divine promise. On the other, thousands of experienced warriors, confident in their numerical and military superiority. The stage was set for one of the most improbable and extraordinary battles in history. As the 300 prepared for the imminent confrontation, a feeling of anticipation and nervousness hung in the air. Each man knew he was about to participate in something much greater than a mere battle. It was the fulfillment of a divine promise, an opportunity to witness God's power in action. With divine confirmation strengthening his spirit, Gideon set out on the challenging task of forming an army. The scenario was not favorable. Years of oppression had undermined the morale of the Israelites, and many hesitated to rise against the powerful Midianites. However, the news of the divine signs began to spread, attracting warriors willing to fight for freedom. Initially, a considerable group of men responded to Gideon's call. There were thousands, ready to take up arms and face the enemy. The newly anointed leader felt a mixture of pride and apprehension, seeing so many compatriots gathered, willing to risk their lives for the cause. It seemed that Israel would finally have enough strength to confront its oppressors. However, the divine plans were different. In a surprising turn, God instructed Gideon to reduce the number of warriors. The logic behind this order was clear. The victory should be attributed unequivocally to God, not to Israel's military prowess. This directive placed Gideon in a dilemma: how to win a battle with fewer men. The selection process that followed was unusual and revealing. Gideon was instructed to observe how the men drank water from a stream. Those who knelt to drink were dismissed, while those who brought the water to their mouths with their hands, staying alert, were chosen. This peculiar method drastically reduced the army to just 300 men. The reduction of the army to such a small number was a test of faith, not only for Gideon, but for everyone involved. The 300 chosen must have felt the weight of responsibility, knowing they would be vastly outnumbered by the enemy. Every man present was aware that his participation was crucial, and that the upcoming battle would be extraordinary. Gideon, now at the head of this small but determined group, faced the challenge of preparing his men not just physically, but also psychologically. He shared with them the experiences of the divine signs, reinforcing the idea that they were engaged in a sacred mission. Confidence in God's promise became the foundation upon which this unlikely army was built. Conventional military strategy would suggest that such a small army had no chance against the Midianite hordes. However, Gideon and his men knew they were not alone in this battle. The divine promise of victory hovered over them, inspiring a courage that defied human logic. The preparations for the battle were unique. Instead of training in traditional combat tactics, Gideon focused on strengthening the faith and unity of his small group. Each man was encouraged to see beyond his personal limitations and trust in the divine plan. This unconventional approach created a strong bond among the warriors, united by a cause greater than themselves. As they approached the confrontation, Gideon faced his own fears and doubts. Leading 300 men against a vastly superior army was an overwhelming responsibility. However, he found strength in the memory of the divine signs and the trust placed in him by his followers. The formation of this small army did not go unnoticed by the Midianite spies. Reports of a diminutive group of Israelites preparing for battle must have provoked laughter and mockery in the enemy camp. Little did they know that this apparent imbalance of forces was an integral part of the divine plan. On the eve of the battle, Gideon gathered his men for a final moment of preparation. He reiterated the divine promise of victory and emphasized that each of them had been chosen specifically for this moment. The Israeli leader knew that the true strength of his army did not lie in numbers, but in unwavering faith in God. The contrast between Gideon's small group and the vast Midianite army was striking. On one side, 300 men armed with fervent faith and the divine promise. On the other, thousands of experienced warriors, confident in their numerical and military superiority. The stage was set for one of the most improbable and extraordinary battles in history. As the 300 prepared for the imminent confrontation, a feeling of anticipation and nervousness hung in the air. Each man knew he was about to participate in something much greater than a mere battle. It was the fulfillment of a divine promise, an opportunity to witness God's power in action. In the dead of night, Gideon and his 300 men approached the Midianite camp silently. The air was thick with tension and expectation. Each Israeli warrior carried not just conventional weapons but also unusual items: a clay jar, a torch, and a trumpet. This peculiar combination would be key to a surprising and effective strategy. Following divine instructions, Gideon divided his men into 3 groups of 100. They positioned themselves strategically around the vast enemy camp, forming a circle. The plan was simple, yet ingenious. At Gideon's signal, everyone would break the jars, reveal the hidden torches, blow the trumpets, and shout in unison, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The moment of action arrived. With a gesture from Gideon, the silence of the night was abruptly shattered. The deafening sound of hundreds of jars breaking simultaneously echoed through the valley. Suddenly, the Midianite camp was surrounded by a circle of bright lights, accompanied by the blaring sound of trumpets and war cries. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Midianites, torn from their sleep, were gripped by indescribable panic. Confusion swept through the camp. In the darkness, they could not discern the real size of the attacking army. The noise and lights created the illusion of a much larger force surrounding them on all sides. Amid the chaos, the Midianites began to fight among themselves. Unable to distinguish friend from foe in the darkness and panic, they turned their weapons against each other. The camp, once a bastion of strength, became a scene of confusion and self-destruction. Gideon and his men watched in awe as the mighty enemy army disintegrated before their eyes. As the night wore on, the panic spread like wildfire. Many Midianites, in their haste to flee, ended up injuring themselves or being trampled by their own companions. Others ran wildly, abandoning weapons, provisions, and treasures. What began as a simple distraction strategy had turned into a complete rout of the enemy. Gideon, realizing the extent of the unfolding victory, ordered his men to maintain their positions and continue with the clamor and lights. This persistence prevented the Midianites from regrouping or realizing the true size of the Israeli army. The illusion of a massive siege was maintained until dawn. With the arrival of daylight, the extent of the victory became clear. The valley, which the night before housed a powerful army, was now littered with abandoned equipment and fallen bodies. The few surviving Midianites had fled in complete disorder, leaving behind not only their possessions but also their reputation of invincibility. The news of the miraculous victory spread quickly throughout Israel. Tribes that had hesitated to join the cause now rallied to pursue the fleeing Midianites. What began as an impossible mission with just 300 men turned into a national movement of liberation. Gideon, in his wisdom, recognized that this victory was not the result of his strategy or his men's bravery, but an undeniable demonstration of divine power. He encouraged his followers to give glory to God, reminding them that it was faith and obedience to divine instructions that made this improbable triumph possible. The victory over the Midianites was not just military, but also psychological. Years of oppression and fear were swept away in a single night. The Israelites, who had lived in terror for so long, now saw themselves as victors, capable of facing any challenge with divine help. The impact of this battle extended far beyond the borders of Israel. Neighboring nations, which had once seen the Israelites as a weak and subjugated people, now viewed them with a mixture of admiration and fear. The story of Gideon's miraculous victory and his 300 men became a legend, inspiring future generations. The spoils left behind by the Midianites in their hasty flight were vast. Gideon ensured a fair distribution among his people, alleviating years of economic deprivation imposed by the oppressors. This unexpected wealth was seen as another divine blessing, a tangible sign of the restoration promised by God. For Gideon personally, this victory was the culmination of a journey of faith and transformation. The young man who once hid to thresh wheat was now hailed as a great leader and liberator. However, he remained humble, always reminding himself and others that true strength came from God. The unconventional strategy employed in this battle became a testament to the importance of trusting in divine guidance, even when it seems to contradict human logic. Gideon's victory served as a powerful reminder that with faith and obedience, even the most impossible challenges can be overcome. After the spectacular victory over the Midianites, Gideon found himself at the center of attention throughout Israel. The people, elated by the newly won freedom and impressed by Gideon's leadership, clamored for a radical change in the power structure. Crowds gathered, voices raised in unison, calling for Gideon to become king, not only over them, but also over their descendants, establishing a dynasty. Faced with this tempting offer, Gideon demonstrated remarkable wisdom and humility. Firmly, he refused the crown, declaring, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." This response was not just a display of personal modesty, but a profound understanding of the true source of leadership and power in Israel. Gideon recognized that his role had been that of an instrument in God's hands, not that of an autonomous ruler. Gideon's refusal to become king was a powerful lesson for the people. It reaffirmed the fundamental principle of Israelite theocracy, the idea that God was the true ruler of the nation. This decision helped to prevent, at least temporarily, the transformation of Israel into a monarchy, keeping intact the social and religious structure that had defined the people since the time of Moses. However, even the wisest leaders can make mistakes, and Gideon was no exception. After refusing kingship, he made a request to the people to give him the gold earrings taken as spoils from the enemies. With this gold, Gideon created an ephod, a priestly garment normally used to consult the divine will. His intentions may have been good, possibly seeking to establish a means of direct connection with God. Ironically, this ephod, created with the intent to honor God, became a spiritual snare for Israel. The people began to idolize the object, treating it as an idol and straying from true worship of God. What was meant to be a symbol of devotion turned into a focus of idolatry, leading many away from the Lord's ways. The story of the ephod serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of subtle idolatry. Even objects or practices initially intended to honor God can become substitutes for true worship. This lesson is particularly relevant as it shows how easily good intentions can lead to unforeseen negative consequences. The ephod episode also illustrates the complexity of human character. Gideon, who had demonstrated so much faith and wisdom, now inadvertently led the people into error. This serves as a warning that even the most respected and well-intentioned leaders can make significant mistakes, especially when they deviate from direct divine guidance. Despite this error, Gideon's overall legacy remained largely positive. Under his leadership, Israel enjoyed 40 years of peace, a period of unprecedented prosperity and tranquility. This era of stability was a testament to the effectiveness of his leadership and the lasting impact of his victory over the Midianites. Gideon's life offers valuable lessons on leadership. His journey from an insecure young man to a confident leader illustrates how God can use ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary feats. At the same time, his failures remind us of the importance of constant vigilance and the need to always seek divine guidance. The contrast between his refusal of the crown and the creation of the ephod highlights the complexity of the choices faced by leaders. Gideon was right to reject absolute political power, but wrong to create an object that inadvertently led to idolatry. This demonstrates that even seemingly pious decisions can have unexpected and potentially negative consequences. Gideon's story also underscores the importance of maintaining humility, even after great achievements. His initial refusal to become king was admirable, but the subsequent creation of the ephod suggests he may have succumbed to a sense of exaggerated spiritual importance. This serves as a warning for leaders of all times about the dangers of pride and self-importance. The long-term impact of Gideon's actions was significant. While his military victory brought peace and prosperity, the ephod incident planted seeds of future spiritual problems in Israel. This illustrates how the actions of leaders can have repercussions that extend far beyond their own lifetime. Gideon's narrative also provides insights into the nature of faith and obedience. His initial journey from doubt to confidence shows how faith can grow through experiences and divine confirmations. However, the ephod episode suggests that keeping that faith pure and focused can be a continual challenge, even for those who have experienced significant miracles. The story of Gideon serves as a reminder of the importance of finishing well. Despite his inspiring leadership and miraculous victories, his legacy was partially tarnished by the ephod's error. This emphasizes the need for consistency and continual vigilance in spiritual life, especially for those in positions of leadership and influence. So what will you do with these lessons? How will Gideon's story shape your decisions going forward? Remember, just as Gideon was called to lead his people to freedom, you also have a unique purpose. Why not take the first step today to discover and live out that purpose? Gideon's journey doesn't end on the pages of ancient history. It continues through people like you who choose to rise, trust, and act with courage. Are you ready to write the next chapter? Don't let this inspiration fade. If you felt touched by this story and want to continue exploring powerful lessons like this, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can uncover the secrets of past leaders to transform our present and future.